So I come across an interesting news article and video published by WFTV9 News, which is entitled "Woman Fights to Have Ham Radio Operations Banned After Potential Interference with Insulin Pump." I sort of did a little bit of research on the topic. I didn't know an awful lot about insulin pumps themselves actually, so I did a little bit of research. But for those that are interested in this story, I'll put a link in the description below and I'll show a short clip exactly what this whole debate and issue is about.
A Marion County woman is taking on her neighborhood's association in a matter she says puts her health at risk.
Yes, she is a type 1 diabetic, and a consultant hired by the community confirmed her neighbor's ham radio hobby may have interfered with the doses of insulin being pushed out from her pump into her body.
Two neighbors tell 9 Investigates they've both thought of moving out.
You can live without your hobby.
Michelle Smith has been in a back and forth with the community's association for a little over a year after she noticed the insulin pump she uses to manage her type 1 diabetes was suddenly giving the wrong amount of the medicine that keeps her alive.
So I switched pumps, bought another one, switched reservoirs, threw insulin away, did everything I could that I know of to troubleshoot, switch sites in case you don't have a good connection. And after about 8 months, I said, it's not me, it's not the pump.
After researching, she suspected the problem may be a few doors down in equipment that's now unplugged and collecting dust.
Have you ever run into any issues like this before?
Never.
David Berg was told to shut down his ham radio operation after On Top of the World hired an independent consultant to investigate Smith's complaints. That engineer determined the amateur radio operator could have produced radio frequency levels that exceed those that Smith's insulin pump is intended to operate in.
I've lost a hobby that I've enjoyed for more than half of my lifetime.
But though his operation is shut down, the community's board of directors then changed the wording in its association rules and regulations to potentially allow more of these amateur radios in the future, changing the definition of antenna allowed after approval from a device used to receive to one that could also transmit radio frequency signals.
They just changed the rules and didn't even deliberate. And I'm there to provide all this proof, and they didn't have a single care.
Smith says she requested a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act to ensure no high-frequency signals can be transmitted within 300 feet of her home.
What would happen if you didn't use it?
I would die.
So there we go. Michelle Smith, who is the complainant in this news article, is saying that the amateur radio operator down the road is causing interference to her insulin pump, which is giving her incorrect doses of insulin. Now, the first thing that I want to do, though, is I do want to sympathise with Michelle. I can understand that this would be a very troubling and difficult situation. And having a device which you rely on for your health is certainly something which you want to make sure works correctly. But there was a few things that troubled me about this particular article and the video itself. Some steps which I don't think were made by not only the media company that was reporting this, but also some practical steps that probably could have been done by both the complainant and also the amateur radio operator in question as well. So in this video, I'm going to try and explain quite simply as I can for those who are not familiar with what amateur radio is or how this interference is occurring. I know that there'd be plenty of people that would be interested in this story who may not be amateur radio operators. But basically, amateur radio is a hobby or a service which is a licensed service, and as part of that, amateur radio operators are required to adhere to very strict guidelines. In fact, it's part of the license test that is taken as far as interference is concerned. So if you're causing interference, then one thing that needs to be done is to resolve that interference as quickly and as practically as possible. Now, there was something that Michelle said in that news report which I thought was quite interesting, and she said,
You can live without your hobby.
Now, there's been plenty of countless news articles and reports of ham radio where it has actually saved lives. In fact, there was one just the other week of an amateur radio operator who saved the life of his friend after he received a phone call from him and recognised his voice after he'd spoken to him many times on the radio before, and he ended up being able to call emergency services on behalf of him and save his life. So I'll put a link in the description below to that article if you haven't seen it, but it's quite an interesting one. There's many other cases too where ham radio has helped in emergency situations and preparedness and all those sort of things. So it's more than just a hobby. It's also an essential part for saving lives and also for emergency services, especially for when, you know, everything goes down and some things don't work. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that all electromagnetic devices, whether that be mobile phones, fluorescent lights, LED lights, cameras like I'm talking on at the moment, laptops, they can all generate and or cause interference and also receive interference from other sources. And it all depends on the device's make, how well it's been shielded, and other factors that come into it. Now, it's pretty easy to just turn around and say to the amateur radio operator down the road with the large antennas who sticks out like a sore thumb that he may have been causing the interference, but it's not always the case. There's microwave ovens, of course, as you'd know, in houses. There's all sorts of RF generators, even just within the home itself, even for those that aren't doing amateur radio. Now, it says here that there was an engineer who was called in as a consultant to determine whether the interference was being caused by the ham radio operator, which in this case is David. And the engineer determined that the amateur radio operator could have produced radio frequency levels that exceeded those Smith's insulin pump is intended to operate in. So I did a little bit of research and I had a look through. One of the first websites that I did go to was medtronicsdiabetes.com, which is quite interesting. It actually says equipment interference. Wearing your device in the presence of everyday equipment may require that you make adjustments to prevent interference. And there's an interesting little chart here that provides guidelines for the devices that you may have. And of course, on the top here is the insulin pump. And you can see quite clearly that X-rays, CT scans, MRIs and PET scans remove the item when in the presence of this equipment. Computers, interestingly, have a tick there, continue to use normally. Cell phones, number one, common consumer electronic devices that transmit in the same frequency band used by MMT 7703 mini-link transmitter may prevent your CGM monitor or insulin pump from receiving the glucose information sent by the transmitter. Now, to dig into it a little bit deeper, from what I could see, the device that she had was a MiniMed, and I think from the model that I could find is a 780G, which interestingly, after I did a Google search, I found on the US Food and Drug Administration website there was a Class 2 device recall for the MiniMed 780G insulin pump. And just having a look at what the recall was for by the manufacturer, it was due to a software design issue. Under certain conditions, a software fault is detected when a large bolus delivery at quick bolus speed completes. If the user is not aware of the amount of active insulin and delivers an additional bolus, there is a risk of insulin over delivery. And it goes into more details. Again, I'll put the link to all of these into the description. There's been other similar recalls by these for these similar type of pumps. So it seems to be a bit of a common thing. If I have a look through the manual as well, specifically for the MiniMed 780G, which again I think is the device in question from what I could see. If we just do a quick search through the manual, it says that if other devices that employ radio frequencies are in use, such as cell phones, cordless phones, walkie-talkies, wireless networks, so even Wi-Fi, they may prevent communication between the transmitter and the insulin pump. This interference does not cause any incorrect data to be sent and does not cause any harm to devices. Moving away from or turning off these other devices may enable communication. A little bit further down, the MiniMed 780 system generates, uses and can radiate radio frequency energy, and if not installed and used in accordance with the provided instructions, may cause harmful interference to radio communications. Portable and mobile RF communications equipment can affect the operation of the MiniMed 780G. If interference occurs, move away from the RF transmitter. So that's quite interesting that the manual states that. Now, as far as the ham radio operator is concerned, from what I could see in the article, the complainant in this case, Michelle, she was asking for the Homeowners Association to limit transmissions from within her area to 300 feet or further away. Now, interference is most common within near field of the antenna in question. So I believe the article said that the amateur radio operator was a couple of doors down, so that's probably several hundred feet away. So probably not in the near field. So there is potential, I suppose, for interference to be caused, but it's not conclusive that the interference was caused by the ham radio operator. And this article and this video doesn't really explain it well enough, and doesn't explain it in a way to say that everything had been ruled out. I know that that Michelle, in this case, I think she said,
I switched pumps, bought another one, switched reservoirs, threw insulin away, did everything I could that I know of to troubleshoot, switch sites in case you don't have a good connection. And after about 8 months, I said, it's not me, it's not the pump.
I'm not sure what pump she tried, whether it was a different manufacturer, a different model, and also whether she approached the amateur radio operator to see if there was some sort of correlation between him transmitting and her pump not working. That's sort of all left up to the imagination. So the reporting wasn't really done that well. It would have been interesting to find out more information as to whether these troubleshooting steps, this is all basic stuff. I mean, especially if you're neighbours, you should be able to work all this out. And for those who may have interference concerns, and you have an amateur radio operator in the area, then by all means approach them and have a chat to them about it, because they don't want to be interfering with your devices, and they're in most cases, more than happy to help. Now, it seems to me that this article was more written towards the fact that it was the Community Board of Directors which have changed their regulations in result to amateur radio operators to enable them to operate more freely. That seems to be more what this article is about. It doesn't seem to be about the interference in itself. It seems to be more aimed at that, which is a bit of a shame, because it gives a bad reputation for the amateur radio community, because we don't all go out and interfere with everybody's medical devices, I can assure you of that. That's something that needs to be dealt with at a different level. I think this is an FDA or an FCC issue, the FCC being the wireless regulator in the United States, to go and deal with these interference complaints, and the FDA to deal with the recall and to make sure that the products are up to scratch and are not going to cause or have interference caused to them. So what do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments below if this is a concerning issue for you. Also, if you want to know more about the great things that amateur radio does for the community, then please check out these links over here, and I'll see you in the next video. 73 for now.